Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Variable Onset by Layla Reyne, narrated by Tristan James. Chapter 1. Getting called to the principal's office sucked at 42, same as it did at 14. Sucked even worse when you were the teacher. Standing in front of a room full of agent trainees, Lincoln suppressed his physical reaction to the gray-haired man who'd snuck into the back of his lecture hall. His mind, though, wasn't so easily wrangled. What had he done now to get on Director Beverly's shit list? Missed another useless meeting? Marched in that protest last weekend? Brought his daughter to the crime lab for Take Your Kid to Work Day? Whatever the explanation, it would have to wait. There were 10 minutes left of class, the last one of the first week of academy. He had led the trainees through a different simulation each day, a preview of the class curriculum and the many facets of forensics. It wasn't just hair samples and DNA, while the basics of evidentiary forensics, collection, handling, analysis, and presentation would eat up most of the class lessons. Lincoln also included specialty units. Today's topic, forensic genealogy, was where Lincoln excelled, where he focused his own work outside of routine case support. He could teach a whole class on the subject, could go on and on with his overview today, but with Director Beverly waiting, he'd have to cut his intro short. He returned to the whiteboard and the series of boxes he'd drawn on a chronological line graph. Time windows that had gotten progressively smaller. "All right, we've narrowed down the date of this picture." He aimed his laser pointer at the presentation displayed on the wall monitor. The current slide, a group photo from his sister's law school study abroad class, to a 3-year time window. He tapped the smallest box on the whiteboard with his knuckle. "Now, can we get this window even smaller? Because if we can," he changed the slide, "then we can figure out which of these Duke Law class rosters to use to identify the student in red." His sister, because Loud was Trina's middle name. "Is this like a positraction thing?" asked a trainee seated halfway up the tiered rows of desks. Lincoln laughed out loud. He wasn't usually a fan of surprises, but an out-of-the-blue reference to one of his favorite movies was a welcome shock. "Are you even old enough to remember that movie?" The kid grinned. "Marissa Tomei was hot as fuck." "Still is," Lincoln concurred. "So was Ralph Macchio, but he didn't age nearly as well." That garnered a few wide-eyed looks and 2 amused scowls, but most of the trainees laughed along with him. He was glad for that, for the evolution of understanding and acceptance that he'd witnessed with each incoming class of FBI agents. He'd been teaching at Quantico for 10 years, been an agent for more than 15, and during all that time, he'd never hidden his bisexuality. His rainbow chucks hadn't always been so welcome, but nowadays he attributed any askance looks to his Argyle sweaters more than his shoes. "Now, come on," he said, calling the class back to order. "You're missing a critical detail." "Give us a hint," said another trainee. "Nope, no hints." The only hints they'd get in the field were from the evidence itself. "Let's go back through it. What have we assessed already?" "The photo paper watermark," a trainee called out. "Always a good place to start." He clicked through the slides to the one that showed the paper manufacturer's logo. It gave us this block. He hovered the red laser dot over the biggest box on the graph, then shifted up to the smaller one. "How'd we get here?" "The Rome Statute," another trainee answered. "On the papers the lady in red is holding." "Good. So, we know this picture is from a date after the Rome Statute was adopted. That puts us at 1998 or later. Help me narrow that down some more." "The hat," said the Marissa Tomei fan. "Maybe," Lincoln hedged. Duke is a popular sports team, and we already know this is a Duke Law class. Does the hat actually help us narrow the time window?" The trainee was closer than he knew, but clothing had led more than one investigator astray. Too many forgot to account for hand-me-downs, vintage stores, and other ways in which threads found their way out of time. "But this hat does go to time," the same trainee said. "That Duke logo was introduced in 2000. Lincoln covered his face with his hands and groaned. "Are you a Duke fan?" He elongated the name of his alma mater's rival, making it sound like D-O-O-K. He couldn't help it. He was a Tar Heel. It was instinct. The class erupted with laughter again. The recruit smiled wider. "Blue Devil for life." Ow. His aching Carolina blue heart. Then again, his sister, a double Duke alum, had been pummeling it for years. He raised his hands, palms out. "Let's never speak of this again." "But I'm right," the trainee said. Lincoln covered his shiver with a laugh. The "I'm right" too reminiscent of a certain other trainee from years back. The one who'd been too smart, too cocky, too flirtatious, and too damn attractive for his own good. A menace to Lincoln in his early teaching years, one that still haunted his nightmares and occasional fantasy. Lincoln hoped Agent Blue Devil wasn't going to be a repeat. He wasn't as handsome by half, but he had that same cocksure attitude about him. That said, Lincoln was a lot more confident now in his place at the front of the classroom. He could handle this trainee. "Indeed you are." He drew a new, smaller box on the whiteboard, advancing the backstop to 2000. That was how to use clothing correctly, as a backstop on creation versus the more fallible sunset on wear. He clicked to the class picture again. "There's another detail you're missing. Can you spot it?" A trainee in the last row slowly raised her hand. "Your name, Agent?" "Barrois." Her voice shook, like she wasn't quite sure about being here, much less speaking up in class. Lincoln shot her an encouraging smile. The soft-spoken ones were often the most observant. Like him, they didn't want to bring attention to themselves. Just the opposite, usually, observing those around them to minimize their impact. "All right, Agent Barrois, give us the missing piece." "Front row. 2 over from the end. There's a girl holding a stack of books. Under them, she's got a concert flyer." "Good eye, Agent Barrois." He stepped behind the lectern and spread 2 fingers on his laptop screen to enlarge and recenter the flyer. "Pearl Jam, Salzburg, June 18th, 2000. Rotating back to the whiteboard, he sketched another smaller box. "So we're talking Duke Law, summer 2000, in Europe." He shuffled the slides back to the class rosters, to the one in question, and powered off the screen. "And we'll find out who the lady in red is when we return to this lesson next month." Laughs, groans, and more than a few no-fair protests came at him, as did a line of trainees afterward, each of them trying to extract more clues from him. It bode well for an interactive class. Caught up in their enthusiasm, Lincoln forgot about his other audience until Beverly appeared at the bottom of the raised classroom's steps. Lincoln finished giving Barrois the list of additional resources she requested. Then, once she'd exited, removed his glasses and turned to Beverly. "Sorry about that, sir." "Was worth it for the My Cousin Vinny reference." Beverly smiled, the creases at the corners of his eyes deepening, but the amused expression faded as quickly as it had come. The director stoic again in a blink. "Guessin' you're not here for 90s nostalgia," Lincoln said. "'Fraid not, and I'm afraid your class isn't going to learn the identity of the lady in red." Fuck. Lincoln mentally rewound the events of the past few months again. No major infractions he could recall. Whatever he'd done, It had to have been relatively minor. Surely not severe enough to cost him his job. "Look, whatever I did, we need your help on a case, Agent Monroe." Lincoln snapped his mouth shut. Not the direction he'd anticipated. His mind tended to jump to worst-case scenarios. But this wasn't an unfamiliar swerve. He'd been pulled onto cases more often lately, especially those involving forensic genealogy. A colleague's instrumental role in catching the Golden State Killer had brought increased attention to their specialty. Judging by the grim countenance on Beverly's face, the case he was here about today was on that same level. Lincoln suspected he knew which one. It had been all over the news this week, and he had a file cabinet full of research about this particular killer. He had wanted to offer his assistance earlier, especially given his personal connection to the latest pair of victims, but he'd been with the Bureau long enough to know the protocol, and to know his personal connection could work against him. The higher-ups would rope him in if and when he was needed, and now here stood Beverly. "Which case?" he asked. "Dr. Fear," the director confirmed. Lincoln's old friend stage fright nipped at his heels, but along with it was excitement, bubbling out to his fingers and toes. The same excitement that carried him into this lecture hall every day, that made him eager instead of terrified to stand in front of each new class of future agents and share what he had learned and the methods he had perfected. But he wasn't only here for the Bureau's trainees. There were field agents to support, his own curiosity to assuage, and mentors he owed his badge to. Beverly was offering him the chance to put all of his knowledge to work on a career-making case. Stage fright could fuck right off. "How can I help?" Lincoln would be lying if he said he hadn't walked past the Dr. Fear Situation Room a time or 20, since news broke of the serial killer's reemergence. Yes, he understood how protocol worked, but he was a trained investigator, same as every agent at Quantico, and according to his daughter, he had the disposition of a lovable yet pissy house cat. Curiosity went hand in hand with his kind. Maybe, he'd thought, someone would notice him pacing outside the Situation Room, would ask him in and request his input on the subject of his thesis, who had struck again after a dozen years of dormancy. But no one had ever asked him inside, and today no one asked his opinion as Beverly ushered him into the room. The case agents, several from violent crimes, acknowledged them with cursory nods. Then those around the table returned to their laptops, and those in front of the television flipped the channel to another news program. 5 sets of photos flashed on screen, all of them couples. 3 of the pairs were the last set of Dr. Fear's victims from 12 years ago. A different pair were the victims found earlier this week, and the last pair were the couple who'd disappeared yesterday, Chase Wyatt and his fiancée, Ruby Kirk. The latter the daughter of Senator Oliver Kirk, the former federal agent who'd last tracked Dr. Fear, and Lincoln's mentor. "Is there a new development?" Lincoln asked, as Beverly led him toward a door at the far end of the Situation Room. Something had to have prompted the director to finally bring him in. "We're not sure yet." Was that the first time he'd ever heard Beverly utter an equivocation? Confused the shit out of Lincoln. "I'm sorry, I don't—" Beverly opened the door, and Lincoln promptly shut the fuck up. Standing around the table in the smaller conference room was a who's who of D.C. Metro law enforcement, FBI D.C.'s special agent in charge, MPD's chief of police, the top U.S. Marshal for D.C., and a haggard-looking Senator Oliver Kirk. Beverly closed the door behind them, and despite 6 men shoved into a room suited for 4, it was quiet enough to hear a pin drop. "What's going on?" Lincoln asked, his voice megaphone loud in the eerie silence. Oliver lifted his gaze, meeting Lincoln's from across the room. "I need your help, El." Lincoln didn't hesitate, shoving aside anyone in his way. He rounded the table and dragged the senator into a crushing hug. Probably not Lincoln's most professional moment, but this was the one person who, in a time when Lincoln hadn't been sure of anything, had been sure of him. By the force of the embrace returned, Oliver needed the comfort too. "Anything, Ollie, you know that." Lincoln drew back and patted his mentor's scruffy cheek. "I'm honestly a little ticked it took you this long to bring me in." "Not my call." Oliver sank into his chair and pushed out the adjacent empty one for Lincoln. "I would have assigned you as soon as the first bodies dropped." "That was my call," the D.C. SAC said, as the rest of the men took their seats. "Those bodies were in our jurisdiction." "Technically ours," the chief of police countered. Lincoln side-eyed the marshal, awaiting his useless contribution to the pissing match. The marshal shrugged. "I'm just the referee." Maybe not so useless. "Violent Crimes has been coordinating here," Beverly added. "Lovely, an interagency pissing match, too." Oliver's hand on his arm forestalled Lincoln's eye roll. "When Ruby was taken," he said, "I told them I wanted you on the case. Something feels off. Dr. Fear's victims were never personal, as far as we could tell, and they were never directed at anyone tied to the investigation." "The victims were strangers to them," Lincoln concurred. There wasn't a shred of evidence in the 3 sets of victims prior to this cycle that indicated Dr. Fear had a previous connection to their victims, either directly or through acquaintances. Victimology was one of the giant blinking question marks surrounding Dr. Fear. How had they identified their victims? Why had they chosen them? How had they learned what the victims feared the most? Dr. Fear had used that to subject each victim to the very thing the victim feared, until they either succumbed to it or succumbed to Dr. Fear, begging for their death. A claustrophobic suffocated, a musophobic set upon by rats, a nyctophobic trapped in a dark basement. The list went on, and always couples, one forced to watch the other succumb to their fears before succumbing to their own. "And then this." Beverly produced 2 evidence bags, one with a slip of paper, the other an overnight courier envelope. "Arrived here this morning, addressed to Senator Kirk." Lincoln slid his glasses on and picked up the bag with the single sheet of paper, peering at the handwritten note. It was a diagnosis, identical in form to the ones found at each place Dr. Fear's previous victims disappeared from, except this one wasn't for a victim. It detailed someone who feared they'd never be noticed, who feared their own crimes wouldn't be memorable enough, who needed to steal someone else's M.O. for notoriety. A copycat. The diagnosis, fear of anonymity, was signed by Dr. Fear, in a script Lincoln could verify as certainly as any bureau handwriting expert. He'd examined the previous diagnoses more than enough times to recognize the sharp, slanted script, with the heavy pen points at the beginning and the end of each string of letters. "They're disavowing the copycat," Lincoln said. Oliver nodded. "That's what it reads like." "You think that's from the real Dr. Fear?" the D.C. SAC asked. Lincoln tapped the signature line. "That's their sig, no doubt, and the form of diagnosis and sentence structure match." "Information about the diagnoses was out there in the press," the chief of police said. "Anyone could copy those." "The existence of the diagnoses was released. The details of the paper they were written on were not." Lincoln held the bag aloft so that the overhead lights would illuminate the watermark on the linen paper, a marker of sorts like on the back of the Duke Law photo they'd analyzed in class today. "This is custom paper. Each small batch is stamped and numbered. Dr. Fear's last diagnosis, from 12 years ago, was written on paper from letter elegant, batch 301. Lincoln rotated so the sack could see the paper's watermark clearly. Letter elegant, batch 302, the older man said. Fuck. The notes of the other two scenes this week? Lincoln asked. Same, Beverly said. Which is why, until that letter arrived, we were proceeding under the assumption that this was Dr. Fear. If this is a copycat, they know about the paper, too. Lincoln tossed the evidence bag on the table. Fuck. Oliver curled a hand over Lincoln's arm again. This is why I told Bev you had to be on the case, officially. Lincoln covered Oliver's hands with his. I'll do whatever it takes to get Ruby and Chase back. I'm glad you said that. Beverly slid a travel envelope across the table. You're on the next flight to Roanoke. Roanoke? Why? As soon as he asked the question, Lincoln recalled the other evidence bag on the table. Wait. He snatched it up and flipped it over to examine the sender address on the shipping envelope. Roanoke, Virginia. What's this address? A residence, a mail center, an office store? None of the above, according to Cyber. Spoofed address, with the label printed online from an untraceable account. Fuck. Then why do we think the note actually originated in Roanoke? Because tracking does show it being retrieved from a Dropbox there. But that wasn't enough. Just because the letter came from Roanoke doesn't mean that's where Dr. Fear is. All their victims were taken from and found in the D.C. metro area. It's more likely they drove out to Roanoke to drop off the letter. There's no reason to think they live there. In Apex, actually, Beverly said. Roanoke is the closest major city. Apex? As in the home of the Mountaineers? Last year's NCAA Division III basketball champions? And in the hunt this year, too. So what if he watched too much SportsCenter? That's the one, Beverly said. We've already got an agent on the ground there. Lincoln's brows raced north. But you just received the letter this morning? He was pursuing a separate matter and came across a lead on this one. He has some expertise in forensic genealogy. No holding back that eye roll. Between television shows, true crime podcasts, and all the press that came with the Golden State Killer collar, everyone thought they were an expert now. Lincoln, Oliver gently chided. What? Oliver chuckled, and Lincoln was glad for that, even if it was at his expense. It's a casual interest compared to yours, Oliver said, but enough he found a connection to Apex. And taken together with the note, You're the expert, Agent Monroe, Beverly said. We would like you to go to Apex and assist our field agent there. But the task force is here. A situation room full of agents, a lab full of everything he could possibly need, and a file cabinet full of his research on Dr. Fear. The senator's daughter is missing, and we haven't caught any breaks. Beverly pushed the note toward him. Until this. This may not be one either. He was sure the note was from Dr. Fear, and he was 90% sure the killer had driven out to Roanoke to mail the letter there and throw them off course. Until this letter, there had been no evidence to the contrary. It's all we've got, Oliver said softly. You know how much Ruby hates the water. I can't imagine her drowning. He swallowed hard, struggling to clear his throat and start again. Whether it's a copycat or Dr. Fear who has them, if past pattern dictates, we have 40 hours left to find them. You are the best person in the Bureau to help us. I need you to do what I couldn't. How was he supposed to say no to that? Fine, he conceded, with one caveat. But I'm driving. It'll be faster than dealing with the airports, and I don't do puddle jumpers. Another watery chuckle from Oliver, a smidge of relief underlying the misery. Lincoln would take that. Pissy house cat for the win.
"Are you sure you want to drive?"
Gabby's voice crackled out of the phone speaker. The connection was shit, but not so bad she couldn't add her 2 cents from whatever embassy she was in this week.
"It's January."
Before Lincoln could counter his ex-wife, their daughter added her 2 cents as well.
"January in the Blue Ridge Mountains."
More like 3 cents. A whole shiny nickel's worth of grief for him. He reemerged from his closet, winter boots in hand, rescued from beneath a pile of yellowing sheet music. He glared across the room at Elena, who sat at his desk behind his laptop. "I'll be fine," he told the crown of her head, a frequent recipient of his discourse these days, her attention always on some piece of tech in her hands. At least today it was at his request. His assistant back at Quantico was scanning and uploading his Dr. Fear research as fast as she could, and as soon as each file hit the shared server, Elena downloaded it and made it accessible on his laptop. "You're from Los Angeles, El," Gabby said, and he redirected his glare at the phone on the corner of the desk. "Snow is a foreign concept." He shoved the boots into his suitcase and zipped it up with more force than the poor, underused thing deserved. "I'm taking the Wrangler. It's 4-wheel drive."
"Doesn't mean you know how to go in snow,"
Elena commented. Lincoln considered throwing a pillow at her, but he didn't want to interrupt her techno-speed demon groove. "And you do."
"Mom lived in the Alps for a while."
"You visited twice," Gabby said. "You're no more a natural at it than Elle." Lincoln chuckled. Mother and daughter sassing each other was one of his favorite things. His laughter died, though, when Gabby swung the conversation back to him.
"You should at least wait until morning,"
Gabby said. "It's 4 here. Apex is only 3.5 hours away. I'll be fine." He didn't have time to waste, not with Ruby and Chase missing, the clock ticking, and his partner already on the scene.
"Miss Parker, they're ready for you,"
someone said in German on the other end of the line.
"Dankeschön,"
Gabby returned, then said to them,
"Gotta go, babes. Elle, shoot me a text when you get to Apex. Elena, behave for Katrina." "Love you, Mom,"
Elena said between mouse clicks. "Ditto," Lincoln replied, "and will do." At her scoff, he added an on-our-daughter's-head promise that earned him the warm, uninhibited laughter he'd fallen for decades ago. It wasn't the same kind of love anymore, but the sound still filled his chest with joy and made him look fondly on their daughter. "ETA for Trina?" he asked Elena, once Gabby had hung up.
"I'm old enough to stay by myself."
"For a few hours, yes. For an indeterminate number of days, no. Plus, you've got your second tournament of the season in Baltimore this weekend. How you gonna get there?"
"Metro? Train?"
World of no. "Where's Trina?" Elena flicked her eyes at him, then to the phone. She tapped at the screen left-handed while her right one continued to manipulate the laptop mouse.
"She's almost here, and you forgot your toiletry kit."
"Fuck." He scurried back to the bathroom and grabbed it off the vanity. It wasn't like he never traveled. Elena often had this or that sporting event, this or that quiz bowl competition, but he never needed more than a duffel and toothbrush for those trips. And they were always on the schedule, well in advance. He thrived on planning, not so much on uprooting his life. That was Gabby's deal, not his.
"Do you even remember how to be a field agent?"
Elena asked. He returned her earlier scowl. "What?" she said, a finger yanking at one of her red-dyed ringlet curls.
"When's the last time you were in the field?"
"Before you were born?" No sense hiding the truth. She knew that much. When Gabby's maternity leave was over, then her local stint with State was up, and she was transferred to The Hague. Lincoln had happily stayed home on dad duty. He had likewise happily traded in his awkward field duty years in which he'd fumbled at interviewing subjects.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?